Welcome to TechRect. I'm your host, Alicia Kellstrom, with a background in B2B tech software and sales. I've spent the last few months exploring new opportunities, and along the way, I've had the privilege of meeting incredible people with fascinating experiences that I can't wait to share with you. Whether you're looking to break into tech, navigate tech tooling, or even coping with the hardship of layoffs, these stories will inspire, inform, and entertain you. Let's jump right in. All right, welcome back to TechRect. Today we are talking to Howard Cho, someone I've known forever. Actually, Howard and I worked at my very first company together and then stayed in touch. And he was also the officiant at my wedding. So Howard, great to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Great, thanks for having me. I actually almost forgot about being the officiant.
When I
That was a long
told my
time ago.
husband that you were going to be, I was like, I'm recording an interview with Howard. He goes, our Howard?
Right.
I was like, what are you talking about? Our Howard. So funny. So great to have you on the show. Why don't we kick it off by you giving us an orientation around your professional background, where in the world you sit in tech, and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, currently I am a data engineer, so I handle what people used to call big data. I don't know if that's still like the phrase that is being used, but yeah, I'm basically just shuttling data from one place to another and trying to organize it in a way that makes it meaningful. So
Interesting. They don't call it big data anymore?
I honestly don't know. I haven't heard the term in a while, but I don't really talk the talk that much. It's really just about you know, try to make it so that all the data that these different teams generate, making it useful, right? Because everyone wants to collect data. They don't necessarily know why, they just want to collect it. But then how do you make sense of it? What do you do with it, right?
What even is it? What is the data? Are you seeing a bunch of ones and zeros and I don't know.
So, no, I mean, if you think about it, if you have like a web application, for instance, right? People want to know how long you've been sitting on a page. What are you clicking on? What are the trends? Anything that you click on, basically, anything that you do, right? You've heard this probably with Google and stuff. They track everything that you do, right? Well, all this data, like you can dump it onto disk or something, but what are you going to do with it, right? If you can't really make sense of it.
Mhm.
So that's basically what it boils down to. I mean, I typically just say I'm basically a garbage man, right? Everyone just generates all this data. They don't necessarily know why, and they don't want to deal with it afterwards. So then they send it to me, and then I put it somewhere and try to make it usable.
I've heard that the amount of data that companies or people need to process over the next 3 to 5 years is going to some ridiculous number X, like 40X or quadruple. The amount of data that we already parse in our day to day is going to get worse.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
not looking forward to that.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, there's a lot of power in data, right? With all this data, if you can make it so you can query it and use it, you could find out a lot of really interesting things. And so it is extremely powerful as long as you're able to A, record it and B, make sense of it. So
Are you tagging the data with certain qualities or attributes to later then use
no,
it?
not so much that. Currently, I work for an AI company, and the big thing that I'm dealing with right now is dealing with usage data. And it's really just how people are using the product. And I'm basically just putting it into tables, for lack of a better term, right? In what we call a data lakehouse, right?
Data
So
lake house?
that's correct. So are you
Okay.
familiar with the phrase data lake?
No.
No, okay. So a data lake is basically where people dump a bunch of data,
Okay.
right? So think of it like a huge disk drive where people just dump data. What a lake house is I think it's a relatively new term, where instead of having to take that data and then push it into something like a warehouse, you can now just query the data lake directly, the data that's on the lake that's sitting on this drive, right? I don't need to upload it to something like Snowflake. So that requires a little bit of work, right? We use something called Hootie tables, and uh, it allows you to query this data at rest on your lake.
Okay, a lot of weird words here.
I'm just making things up. I'm just making things up.
I hate it. Well, I'm glad that that's something that you're called to do. How did you get started with where you are now? And congrats for getting into the AI game. It's highly competitive, hard to get into those companies. So congrats, kudos to you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I do want to preface by saying that I am not an AI person, right? They had a need for someone to manage all this data that's coming down the pipeline.
Hmm hmm
I am nowhere near as smart as the people in our AI team. These people are absurdly smart, and it's kind of painful. I just hide back in the shadows and just do what I do and try not to cause a stir,
Well,
right?
that's actually reassuring because people are talking about how AI is going to cannibalize all of our jobs. But even a AI powerhouse company, which people will see where you work on your LinkedIn, because I'll link that in the show notes, still
Right.
need your expertise. Like you haven't been, um, pushed out.
Yeah, there's a ways to go before AI is able to take over at least tech jobs, I think. Like people have said, I've had problems with code before, and they're like, "Oh, you should just ask ChatGPT," and I've done that, and it writes pretty terrible code. I'm not gonna lie, like it's pretty awful. So I've looked at it and been like, "All right, yeah, that'll work, but that's not what I want to do." So I have to go in and I just have to fix it. But I mean, it's been good for getting you started. Like if you're on a hump, right, and you just need something that trying to think of a different way to get something going. It's been helpful for that. So.
Yeah, I saw someone post to LinkedIn the other day that if they saw one more post or like one more piece of content that was so clearly written by AI that they were going to XYZ whatever. And I was like, oh shoot, I've been using it just to help me, organize a post and then, but not changing too much. I will kind of edit things back into my own voice, but sometimes I'm tired and I just go with it. And so now it's obvious that there will be people who can really identify it, or there's companies that are or people are creating their own GPTs in their voice. So you train the GPT to use your mannerisms or to use how you would normally write. So I might try to see what that does.
Well, things in my voice are weird because I work for, we do speech to text and text to speech, and they actually just used my voice. And it is, from what I understand, the number one male voice being used right now.
You're
So
my first famous guest. Look at that.
I wouldn't say famous, no. It's super weird though, like hearing my own voice because it obviously sounds like me.
How
And
many things did you need to say to train the machine to your voice?
I don't remember, I think it was like about 150 phrases. It wasn't terrible, and they were just asking for help. So I was like, all right, yeah, yeah, I'm happy to do it. Like, I think it'd be kind of cool. I didn't really realize the ramifications that, like, oh, this might actually go out live, and now customers are going to be using your voice.
That's so
Weird.
funny. That's so funny. I talked to somebody who's using AI in like a trade organization, like a roofing company is using a caller AI to do lead generation. So it'll call houses, but people with their phone numbers are available, and the AI will ask them, a storm just came through and we're doing free assessments to identify if there's any damage to your roof. But obviously they have to use someone's voice to, and so
Mhm.
just imagine your voice being used in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not looking forward to the first time I have a conversation with myself. Um, very, very awkward.
That's incredible. Okay, well, so
Especially, I,
let's,
I find my own voice extremely grating and aggravating. So, like, it's not going to do well for me.
everyone hates the sound of their own voice. You're just going to have to get used to that. So back up, like I met
Yeah.
you in '07-ish, I think, and you were in tech already. So how did you get here?
Yeah, so I have a really strange work history. I started out, I owned a martial arts school, and I was doing that. I actually didn't finish college because I had to start working full time to pay the bills, to help my mother and stuff like that. So I was working full time, owned this martial arts school, and it did really well. My enrollment got really large. My school actually became the largest in the East Coast for the organization that I was part of.
Wow.
Uh, Yeah, it was the world governing body for the art that I taught. And so I had something like over 600 active students. It was insane.
Can
And
we
I
just
would
pause
spend,
for a second? Like, do you have to go the hard route for everything? I'm just so like, you're like, I need to get a job to help. I have to drop out of college. Let me start a school. Like, that doesn't seem like the easiest path, but keep going. Sorry.
well, okay, so I didn't start the school. I was I was the instructor there.
Yes. Okay.
And then I just took it over because it
Oh,
was,
got it. Okay.
so yeah, I didn't start it from scratch, right?
Okay.
Although I did in that time, I had started three other schools from scratch. So I'd
Jesus
already had that
Lord.
experience. It wasn't on my dime though, right? I was taken and sent there to help get the school off the ground.
Got it.
So,
Okay. That's
yeah,
interesting.
but yeah, so it was great experience and my school blew up and I was doing really well, but it was done really like in an old school fashion, right? Everything was done by hand. You had like attendance cards that you had to check. I would spend hours going through these attendance cards every day. And I was like, there's got to be a better way, right? Let alone like testing and belts and all this other nonsense and renewals. And so I bought a book on VB6 and I just kind of wrote some software.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. It's so easy. Just kind of wrote some software. Sorry, what did you call it? VB6?
that's right, Visual Basic.
How did you know that that was the thing you needed?
I didn't.
Okay.
I just looked at a bunch of books and I was like, oh, okay, I know of Microsoft, right? And I was like, oh, okay, this is a legit programming language. And it looks pretty straightforward. It's called Basic, so how hard could
Okay.
it be, right? So yeah, so I bought the book and yeah, I wrote some software and at first all it did was it just tracked like renewals. And then I was like, oh, it'd be really great to help take care of attendance. So like, yeah, I got excited because I was having fun. I was like, oh, I can make stuff. This is crazy. So I bought a barcode scanner and I built that functionality and I made these little laminated cards for all my students where they could, check themselves in and their name would pop up when they beat themselves in. So they loved it. The kids loved it, especially.
That's
And
crazy.
it took all the burden off my shoulders. So now, you know, fast forward probably like 6 months, this system is basically running my school, right? It's letting me know when renewals are due. It's letting me know people that are up for promotion and how they did on their last test. Did they pass? Did they fail? This and that. I took over the school, and my business partner was a pretty high level manager at IBM. And she one day said, was like, listen, we're doing really well. I have a tech guy who's constantly asking me to do side work. Would you be interested? I was like, yeah, so we started like a side consulting company
Huh.
because during the day I was free now, right?
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
so we started doing that and I started like getting really into like all kinds of weird things. He had me do like 3D animated video, which like it was like a 20-second reel and it took us over a week to render.
Oh
It was
my God.
nuts. Yeah. So like yeah, so I got my hands dirty in like a whole bunch of different things and I found data was really interesting. So, um, yeah, and it just kind of took off from there. Like we started off helping a nonprofit Latin American organization in New York convert their data systems over, but the data was really dirty. So they brought us in, and I built all these like customized tools to help massage the data, clean it up, and put it into like a relational format. Um, and then once that was done, they were really happy. So they were like, hey, would you guys be our full-time IT?
Hmm.
So they hired us.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was there for a couple of years and then ventured off on my own. And yeah, that's how I got my start.
Dang. What a story. Also, it seems like, I mean, one of the themes that I've had talking to guests is like, do what you love to do. Like, what lights you up? What are you getting involved in that you could focus on for hours?
Yeah.
So it sounds like you really found that. Or do you still feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say that is because I was just kind of drawn to it. And when we started this consulting firm, it was right when the tech bubble burst. So everyone's like, you're nuts getting into this industry. But I was like, I don't know, I find it really interesting and it's fun. Right. So yeah, it's like a puzzle every day. I'm dealing with like a problem and I have a toolbox of skills and I can make things work.
Interesting. And so that's really interesting. You brought up the tech bubble. I've heard that this current job market is worse than that tech bubble. Do you have a perspective on that? I know that you haven't actually like been impacted by this particular job market, which I think has changed quite a bit over the last 6 months to a year, even from 2, 3 years ago. So you might not have that firsthand experience for right this current moment, but give us a little bit of a comparison to what you know about what's happening today and that market from the bubble.
Interestingly, I was impacted this time. I actually was laid off. I was at a very large company, a very large startup that was doing very, very well. And I was part of a large round of cuts where I think they let go of something like 20% of the engineering staff. I was lucky in that I got another job relatively quickly, but I know others are not so lucky. And there are still people struggling. You have a little bit of guilt sometimes, right? It's like, well, I'm not better than you. Like, why do I get a job? But anyway, we can't live life like that, right?
Hmm.
I can't really compare it to the last tech bubble because I was pretty young and I was new to the industry. So it was all opportunity for me. When I owned the martial arts school, I didn't pay myself much, right? I tended to reinvest back into the school, right? Like I gave people that had like financial hardship, I gave them free tuition,
Oh,
and things like that, right? So I was trying to like make it a good school, like a good place to be and a good like part of the community. But in tech, it's like I was getting paid so much more,
yeah.
you know, and um and I didn't have to deal with machismo, which was beautiful, right? Which you have a lot of that in the martial arts, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Oh, interesting.
Lots of tough guys, right?
Huh.
It's kind of, but anyway, so in comparison, it was when I got into it, even though the tech bubble had burst, it was opportunity for me, right? Now that I'm already in tech, getting laid off, seeing all these people getting let go, and then Facebook letting people go, and Google and all these huge corporations letting off huge amounts of people all at the same time. That's frightening, you know? Is it worse? I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more startup companies out there now.
Hmm.
Like back in the previous tech bubble, there were a lot of big players, right? But I feel like the prevalence of the number of startups was a lot lower,
So then
right?
that translates into fewer opportunities.
Yeah, but again, this is just a guess.
Yeah.
I really have no like intelligent insight into it because I didn't really experience, the tech bubble
Yeah.
from the same direction as somebody that was in the industry.
Right. So you said just now that you had been impacted by a layoff. So what did you do to find your next opportunity? What were the tactics that you utilized that got you recognized and able to land somewhere?
Honestly, I don't know.
Howard, come
What,
on.
yeah, what I tried to do is I try to focus on my strengths, and what I could bring to the table. I've tried to do that all my career. It's like learning, just constantly trying to learn because like I have an active interest in what I do, right? It's not like I'm just doing it for the paycheck. I guess that's kind of the first thing I tell people that want to get in tech. I've had a lot of people come to me and talk to me about getting, making that leap. And my first question always to them is like, is it something you're actually interested in? Because if you're not interested, it's an uphill battle the entire time. And it's really not worth it, right? Like it's like anything. If you're just doing it for the paycheck, you're not going to have a passion for what it is you do. So the quality of what you do is going to be lower. So when there are layoffs, you're the first person let go,
Hmm.
right? And I think that's what we're seeing right now, right? A lot of people got into tech because it was a stable job, it paid well, and it was like the future. But and the future, yes, it's the future. It's been a long time, but
Right.
it
It's
is
it's continuing
going
to
on
be
in
the
the future.
future.
Right. And so, I feel like if your passion is not there, it's going to be really, really difficult. So anyway, in my career, I've always just tried to continue to grow and learn new things and get better. And so I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's my work history, but I had a lot of people reaching out to me with job openings, right? Headhunters. And so I was like, all right, you know what? Let's talk it through. And I'll be honest, like I interviewed at a bunch of places that rejected me, a lot of places. I mean, straight up ghosted by a bunch of places too, right? I had at least two other companies say, we're sending you an offer. And all right, cool. Waiting, 3 days, 4 days, no communication. I follow up. I'm like, hey, just curious what's going on because I have more interviews coming up, right? Ghosted.
What?
Yeah. And then like one of them,
Unbelievable.
at least one of them got back to me like, oh, really sorry. We had some internal stuff and we're gonna get back to you next week with an offer. Like a week later, and they're like, oh no, yeah, actually, no, we ended up hiring somebody else. It's like, all right, cool. Well, why are you gonna,
Wow.
so yeah, it was unusual, but I'm lucky that I didn't take anybody's word for it, right? Like, even though people were saying they were giving me an offer, I was just still interviewing. Um, and I guess, persistence is the key, not taking it to heart, right? I mean, I've been knocked down enough times in my life that, if you tell me that I'm not good at what I do, I don't really care what you think. I know what I'm good at what I do. I have lots of places to grow, but I have that capability. So, I mean, I had a manager once who was basically the entire time just telling me, like, oh, I think you're very green. But then would continue to give me more responsibility that I would take on, you know, and was never really supportive. And it was funny because I didn't really let him keep me from where I was going.
Mhm.
And I
Interesting.
think I turned out okay.
So
So,
you have the growth mindset, learner's mindset, always be learning.
yeah, well, it's interesting to me,
Hmm.
you know? It is. So it's not like it's that difficult to want to do it.
And it seems also that it's probably ever evolving, that it doesn't stay, it's not a static thing. There's constantly innovation and new things to learn, especially about lake houses and hootie somethings.
That's right. Yeah.
Something that we haven't really touched upon, and it kind of speaks to the ability for you to have found a place so quickly. Because in my mind, I think you said something like 3 months between layoff and new start. You're kind of like the mayor of New York, right? You've got a huge network and you keep in touch with a lot of people. Would you disagree? Don't give me this shocked face.
Mayor, that's a strong term. Yeah, I mean, I know a good number of people. I've done a lot of weird things, right? Like I owned a bar. That's probably why I know as many people as I do.
Huh,
But I also used to do like concert promotion on the side. That's how I got the bar, right? It's like,
okay. Do
yeah.
you think that that played a part at all in your, like, that's kind of like, that's a totally different industry than what
Mhm.
you do for your job, your day job, right? So do you think that the connections that you made doing that also played a part in your day job activities or not so much?
Not, I wouldn't say directly, but what it did do is it gave me a release and a break from focusing on tech, right? Like it gave me another outlet. It gave me something to do that I was also interested in, right? Because if your work is your life, I couldn't imagine like that would be awful. Actually, I can't say that. There are some people who do it and they love it. I would have a hard time with it, right? I need variety. So for me, I think the reason I'm able to be as invested in my job and not frustrated, right? Because jobs are frustrating, is that I had something else that I was doing.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that gave me a sense of security. I don't know if it gave me, I don't really give a shit if you don't think that I'm good. I don't know how it helped, but I have a feeling it helped, right?
Yeah. Well,
Right.
and also you're kind of a self-starter. You taught yourself how to be a data engineer to begin with, and then continuing to do the continuing education and keeping up with the industry trends and being like a serial entrepreneur. You're like, I had a bunch of businesses. You had a couple different side hustles. It sounds like you use your data engineering as your anchor point, but then you diversify for whatever you're interested in to have like a well-rounded existence. So great job.
Thank you. Yeah, my job helps me live and helps me take care of my family and not stress too much about the future. which affords me the time and the flexibility to do things that I'm interested in, right?
Yeah, that's good. Cool. So what would you suggest, Howard? Is data engineering, is there a ton of security in data engineering? Is there a lot of opportunity there? What do you think folks should be thinking about if they're interested in data engineering?
You know, data engineering is interesting because I do feel a lot of companies that are going to be successful and want to be successful will need data engineering, right? So I feel like I got very lucky in the path that I chose. Right now, HR and front end engineering, it's really hard to find positions, hard to find jobs. But data engineering, a lot of companies know they need it. And so I think as a data engineer, it's probably a little bit easier in this market than maybe other people in tech. But I think no matter what, the market is flooded with tons of talent and top tier talent. The only thing I can say to people is like, there's always going to be somebody that's smarter than you and better than you. And they may interview for the same position as you. But just like interviews, it's not an exact science, right? You could go into an interview, they ask you a question that you feel really confident with, you're going to kill that interview. At the same time, you get interviewed and they ask you a question that is like way out of left field, something that you've not experienced, and you're going to bomb that interview. And the people who are smarter than you, same thing is going to happen to them.
Hmm.
So just because you're in a queue of 200 applicants for a job doesn't mean you're not going to get it, right? And it doesn't mean you have to be the best of the best. You have to be the best for what they want at that moment. They have to make that call, and it's really tough for them too. It's hard. I've done a lot of hiring. It's tough. You do your best to try to get at the root of the person to understand, are they capable of doing the job and are they willing to learn? But there's so much at play, right? It's how you carry yourself. Are you kind of an asshole? Well, nobody would work with an asshole, right? So you could be the smartest person in the room, but if you're an ass, I kind of don't want you. I don't want to deal with that. And you're going to make four of my other engineers want to leave.
Hmm.
So, I guess I would say to people, focus on your strengths, right? As you're interviewing, focus on your strengths, but be willing to learn and build up your weaknesses. Having a humble attitude, I think, is extremely important because every position is like you should have something to learn. If you're only applying to jobs where they're doing something you've already done, I mean, it's not terrible, but you have to be able to grow too. If you're not growing, the industry is going to move on without you because it moves fast, it moves very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
And you can see now how that's impacting folks from a job security level because
oh, yeah.
regardless of whether or not you have been keeping up or not, it still remains that there are so many highly qualified people all vying for a shorter supply of available jobs. But
Hmm.
also, I don't know. I feel like there's a ton of smaller companies that could use help. And then there's people who are now going into consulting, kind of like taking
Yeah.
on project work instead of trying to find the one company that's going to be the right home for them. So, a lot of the conversations I've been having, the common theme has been that there's still hope. And as long as you're staying persistent and thinking about that interview funnel, I mean, it's wild to me that companies are ghosting candidates or they're actually even posting jobs that aren't budgeted yet. They're just kind of putting together a potential roster of talent. But I feel like that's such a waste of time because if you don't have it approved yet, then those candidates are going to find opportunities. Everyone is looking for a job. They're going to take the first job that comes along, because we need it. We need the
Right.
income, right?
I think HR people are having a rough time right now too, right? Whether it's definitely finding new positions, but with all these cutbacks, you have to try to like kind of justify your existence at a company, it feels. So I don't know, maybe that's why they're kind of doing these things. I have no clue, but it is tough. But I will say regarding hope, there's always hope. As long as you're alive, there's always hope, right? And it can be really, really hard, but if you're capable, then there's always hope. And I think that's people give up on themselves a lot. And I think that is guaranteed failure, right? Like you want to guarantee failure, give up. That's how you're going to guarantee failure, right? Nobody's going to come to you and be like, well, very, very rarely is somebody going to come to you and be like, you'd be perfect for my company, please come, right? I think you have to continue to put yourself out there. For me, LinkedIn was huge. I updated my LinkedIn. I actually didn't even send a resume out to anyone really because I didn't have it updated, and everyone was hitting me up just because of my LinkedIn. So,
Huh. What'd you put on your LinkedIn, Howard?
I just put in like what I've done, right? And granted, I will say I went to friends who are way smarter than me with writing because I'm a terrible writer. Nowadays, ChatGPT it, but I reworded my projects in LinkedIn to be a little more focused on what did I actually do and what was the impact. So I think that probably helped because it's like very to the point. You read, if you look at my profile, here's what I did, here's the impact, and it's just listing it out. And I think that bypasses a lot of the need for a resume.
That's so interesting because that brings us back to the first episode of Tech Rect with Kimberly Kiesler said that you need to put not what you were responsible for, but what did you accomplish? What did you actually do? And so that it communicates that you're able to problem solve versus you're responsible for XYZ. So, wow, look at that. Full circle. Back to the beginning.
That's right. I saw that episode, by the
Oh,
way.
you did. There you go. Maybe I primed you for that then. That's funny. Well, we're down to the last 2 minutes here, and it's been great chatting with you, Howard. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you for sharing your words of wisdom around hope. Anything else that you can share with the audience based off of the current tech market, being in tech? What else can we provide as guidance?
I guess the only thing I would leave it with is the industry's constantly in flux. Like it's a constant cycle, but it's a wave. It gets good, it gets bad, it's good, bad. If you can ride it through this wave, hopefully you'll be making it out on the other end when, it picks itself back up.
Okay, so the $1 million question. I've had a couple people kind of forecasting. How long is the time horizon on the bad times?
Wow.
Yeah, I'm
That's a
putting
hard
you on
one.
the spot. Yes.
Oh man, I'm gonna be held to it, right?
I'll be
I'm
checking back
hoping
in.
I would say within the next 2 years, hopefully.
Damn, 2 years.
Well, before it's like booming like it
Yeah.
was. I mean, I have a feeling it's on the upswing now, right? How long is it going to take to hit its peak? Right. So I don't know.
Okay.
Full guess. Could be
So
6 months.
March of 2026, I'll be coming back at you to say,
Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm not too worried.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Howard. Thank you for being on the podcast and can't wait to share this with everyone. We'll find you on LinkedIn.
Sounds great. Thanks.
That has been today's episode of Tech Rect. If you or someone you know wants to be on the show, email techrectpodcast@gmail.com and we'll get it scheduled. See you next time.